So why are there three different fingerings for B flat? Why does one note need so many options, and how can you ever know which is the right fingering to choose? Stay tuned to find out. Hi there, I'm Lance Suzuki. I'm a professional flutist and teacher, and my goal is to inform and inspire your flute practice. In this tips and tricks series, I'm giving you quick advice on a variety of topics relating to maintaining and playing your flute at its best. So if you're interested in seeing more flute content like this, go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Today's tip is all about one note, B flat, and its three different fingerings. So let's start by reviewing those three fingerings. Now the first fingering is what I call either the fork or split B flat. Sometimes you'll see it called the long B flat. In addition to the thumb and the first finger in the left hand, we're also using the first finger in the right hand and the pinky. Now this is often one of the first fingerings for B flat that most flutists learn, especially in places like band. And I think it definitely was the first B flat fingering I learned. But what about you? Was this your first B flat fingering? If so, let me know in the comments. Next we have the B flat thumb. Now if we look at the back side of the flute where the thumb key is, we notice that there are two separate thumb keys. Now this is the B natural key, and here is the B flat thumb. So just by pressing down the first finger and the B flat thumb with the pinky, I can also get a B flat. Finally, our third fingering uses what we call sometimes the side key or the B flat lever. I've heard it called a trill key online, but I don't really think it's a trill key. So I usually call it side key or lever or side lever key, whatever you prefer. So that key is right here. And if you have a flute with a C sharp trill, notice that there are two levers here, okay? But the B flat lever or A sharp lever is the one that's on the right hand side here, okay? Often it's also lower than the C sharp trill key. So to do that fingering, we're just using the regular thumb, the first finger, the side key, and the pinky. So those are the three B flat fingerings. So do you use all three B flat fingerings fluidly, or do you tend to gravitate towards one of them over the others? Please let me know in the comments. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna do a flute swap. So here we go, swap it out. And I'm swapping out for this Louis Lot flute, which was built in 1892. Now I do have another video out there where I compare the 1892 Louis Lot to this 2019 Brannen, so please check that out. That was a fun video to make. But I'm bringing this flute out just to show you that 1892, 2020, so that's like what, 125, 130 years. And look, we have the same fingering system, the B flat side key, fork B flat, and the B flat thumb. So these three fingerings for B flat have existed for nearly 200 years now, and we have to ask ourselves, if there weren't a more efficient way to do this, why would they still be around? And the answer is that each of these fingerings serves a different purpose. So we're going to talk more about that later in the video. So I'm back with my Brannen flute, and before we talk about the uses for each of those three B flat fingerings, let's first talk a little bit about flute mechanics. So if I were to ask you which key on the flute is responsible for producing B flat or A sharp, what would you say? You might say, hey, wait a minute, he just said there's three different fingerings, so that's three keys, right? And actually, this was kind of a trick question, because the key responsible for creating B flat and A sharp is one that your fingers actually never touch. And it's this one. Now this is the key between your first and second fingers in the left hand. So I'm going to play a B. And even though I never actually touch this key with my finger, I'm going to use it now just for you. So you see that just by depressing this one key, I was able to get the note to go down a half step from a B natural to an A sharp or a B flat. So this is what you might call true A sharp or true B flat. And the reason that we never put our finger on this one key is because if I used my middle finger here, I would quickly run out of fingers to push down all the other keys. So that's why we have key connections and other keys that are able to assist us in helping to get this one A sharp slash B flat key down. Now, some of those include, like I said before, the side key, the B flat thumb, and the F key, which creates our fork, split, or long B flat. As I mentioned before, each of these three B flat fingerings serves its own purpose. So let's talk about those three purposes now. The B flat thumb is a very convenient fingering that is perfect for key signatures and extended passages of music with a lot of B flats and A sharps. For example, a B flat major scale. The B flat thumb is not ideal for quick chromatic passages where you have to go directly between B flat and B natural. And as a general rule of thumb, get it? I don't recommend sliding between those two thumb keys. However, if you're passing through a note where you release the thumb, such as a C, C sharp, or high G, it's perfectly fine to go between the two thumb keys freely. When you're moving between your two thumb keys, and especially in complicated passages, I highly recommend marking your music. Personally, I use a simple plus sign to indicate B flat thumb on, and a minus sign to indicate B flat thumb off, or regular thumb. Let's look at this example from Garibaldi's Opus 132 Etude number 2. When using the B flat thumb, feel free to leave it down for the whole time, even if you're not playing a B. To demonstrate that, let's look at that same B flat scale I played before, but from behind so you can watch my thumb. However, there are a few exceptions to this rule, and those include high F sharp slash G flat and high B natural. In these cases, the A sharp slash B flat key needs to be raised in order for the notes to resonate properly and to play in tune. So be sure to find a good place to move your thumb in advance and mark it in your music. The B flat side key or lever key should be your go-to fingering for fast chromatic passages and chromatic scales, such as in the ending of Saint-Saëns' Volière from Carnival of the Animals. When other fingers in the left hand are down, it's totally okay to leave your finger down on this side key. For example, also watch my side key action in this quick excerpt from Bach's Polonaise from the B minor suite. Did you notice that I left the side key down between A sharp and F sharp? It happened pretty quick, but that's totally okay. In case you missed it, here it is again. Similar to the B flat thumb, make sure that the side key is lifted when you're playing high F sharp or G flat, or high B natural. Also, I don't recommend sliding between the right hand and the side key. Which brings me to the third and final fingering for B flat, which I call the B flat of last resort. Before we discuss the usage of fork B flat, let's first talk about why it's the B flat of last resort, even though it's often the first B flat fingering that we ever learn. As I mentioned before, all that's required to produce an A sharp or B flat is just this one single key going down. Now, when we use the B flat thumb or the side key, we're controlling just that one key. This makes those two fingerings the most mechanically efficient and acoustically perfect options for fingering a B flat. However, when we use the fork or split or long B flat, notice that not one, but 3 keys are going down at once, making this fingering less mechanically efficient and less acoustically perfect, and thus the B flat of last resort. This doesn't mean that you should never use fork B flat. Instead, use it in chromatic passages where it's not feasible to get to the B flat thumb or the side key without sliding, such as this excerpt from Kohler's Opus 33 Etude number 13. And I'm also going to play through to the end of this etude so that you can see how I fluidly move between the fork, B flat, and the side key. Like the beginning of this short excerpt, you will often have to use fork B flat in chromatic passages where you are also using the right hand and going between the two. Also, don't forget to mark your score. Now I tend to use this fork symbol to remind me to use the split B flat. However, this is not a very common symbol and it's kind of just my trick that I'm sharing with you. To recap today's tips and tricks episode, use the B flat thumb key in most key signatures with flats, as well as in extended passages with a lot of B flats and A sharps. Use the side key or lever key for quick chromatic passages and chromatic scales. Use the fork, split, or long B flat in chromatic passages where it's not feasible to get to the B flat thumb or side key without sliding, such as when you're coming from right hand fingerings. Be sure that the B flat thumb and side key are not down on high F sharps, G flats, and B naturals. And finally, be sure to mark your music to remind yourself which fingering to use. As with many other things in life, rules are meant to be broken. So if you're having trouble playing a passage cleanly without sliding your thumb, don't beat yourself up about it. You do you, and always choose the option that sounds the cleanest and that's the easiest to execute consistently. Well, that's it for today's tips and tricks episode, and I hope I was able to provide you with some useful information about the 3 B-flat fingerings and how and when to use them. If so, please let me know in the comments and by giving this video a like. Also, to see more informational and inspirational flute content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching!